Okay, hello, everyone, and welcome to a RevGen Partners webinar on how to collaborate and conduct business in the virtual world. My name is Ian Foley, and I'm a Director of Analytics and Insight Services here at RevGen. We're very excited for today's webinar and looking forward to sharing tips from our experience that has allowed us to transition to working remotely and helping our folks support our clients remotely. Before we jump in, quick background on RevGen Partners. We are a business and technology consulting firm based in Denver, Colorado. We support clients from the Fortune 50 through the mid-market and across industries such as telecommunications, financial services, manufacturing, high tech, real estate, and education. We offer services across three main areas: customer experience, analytics and insights, and digital enablement. For today's agenda, we're going to cover four main topical areas. We're going to start by talking about how do we overcome some of the challenges of working remotely as professionals. How do we have really great remote meetings and ensure success with those meetings? And then how do we leverage all of this great technology available to us to have those great remote meetings? And then we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about how do we replicate human-to-human collaboration in the virtual world. So that'll be our last topic to cover. We are going to have a brief QA at the end of today's webinar, so I'd ask that you please use the QA feature of the Zoom meeting to ask any questions that you have. We'll answer some of those questions as we go and then select a few to cover during the Q&A session at the end of the content. Lastly, we'll be sending a recording of today's session out to all attendees, as well as including it on our YouTube channel. We really hope you enjoyed today's webinar, learned something, maybe even have a laugh or two. Now I'm going to hand it over to Brian Liberatore to take us through today's webinar.
Ian, thanks very much, and good afternoon to everybody. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. I'm looking forward to sharing some good information with you today. A little background on myself: I'm a manager with RevGen, focused in data and analytics, and I spent a fair amount of my career working remotely. I know for a lot of people this is new, but I'm speaking from experience. It's very doable. It's possible to be productive and successful while working remotely. I'm going to share some tips, some secrets, some ways to do that. First thing we wanted to do, I wanted to share this quote with everybody. This is from a recent Harvard Business Review article about showing compassion to your coworkers. The reality is this is a new situation for all of us. And as it says here, people are essentially good. We're all doing the best we can. So just ask that all of us kind of understand that this is new, this is different, it's not normal, and that we give ourselves and each other a bit of slack. That said, there are ways to work effectively while remote. This first section, I'm just going to talk about some things we can do individually to be successful out of the office and in the home office. The three main areas there are the routine, having the right space, and using technology effectively. So routine is important, and let's accept it's going to look different from our routines from before, but routines are important because they ease a lot of that mental strain. They ease that cognitive strain in that you're not always having to think about what's next. If you have a routine, if you have that schedule, it gives you a space to focus on what you're doing in the moment instead of always thinking, okay, what do I have to do? What do I have to do? And then it's important to have that on a calendar. Keep that up to date. And we also want to emphasize it's important to include breaks in that calendar. Block off parts of time where people let everybody know you're not available during that time and use those breaks effectively. Go outside, spend some time with your family, maybe get away from your family, but use those breaks effectively. Keep them on your calendar. Other thing is a priority list. Now all of us have a to-do list of some sort to monitor and follow tasks and deliverables. In this situation, it's very important to prioritize those tasks. What I'm showing up here, this is an Eisenhower matrix. It's just one way to do it. The main takeaway here is that you're focusing on what's urgent, what's important. You're doing that first. When you're done with the most important thing, move on to the next important thing. When you don't know how much time you're going to have in your day, when your day has changed so significantly, it's important to focus where it matters. The other piece of this is having a space in your home. And of course, this looks different from everyone, but a few universal attributes to having a good space at home. You need it to be quiet as possible, limit distractions, make it comfortable. You're going to spend a lot of time in that space throughout all this. So recommend a good chair, just make it comfortable. And probably most importantly, keep that space separate. This is important mentally as well as physically to have that separate space that's the home office that you can work in regularly. The other piece is technology. And we're going to touch on this a lot during this webinar, the fact that conversations are important. Conversations matter. I know we've lost this ability to have these casual conversations in hallways and in the office. So we have to do things. We have to use technology to enable those types of conversations. We'll recommend using video where possible, understanding that some bandwidth restrictions might prevent this. But having video, it doesn't replace those face-to-face conversations, but it can help replace some of what's lost. Telephone is just a great way to have those conversations. A lot of times it's more effective than email. And there's a lot of tools out there that we're all using that help facilitate those conversations. I'm thinking of Skype, Slack. I mean, use them when you can. Be smart about it. You don't want constant interruptions. But these things are important. So remember, get the routine, have the space, and use the technology intelligently. A few takeaways from this section, right? Routines are important because they free your mind. Keep that space separate from the rest of your home. And we'll touch on this again, but conversations matter. They're important. Now we're going to move on to remote meetings, right? Meetings are, for better or worse, a part of what we do every day. And it's important to do them correctly. We're going to pause here and actually take a little quiz. So I'd like everybody, if you could, pay attention here and go ahead and shout out the answer if you can. What do these things have in common? You've got Santa Claus, you've got the Easter Bunny, and you have an engaged virtual attendee. The fact is, none of these things exist. These are all pernicious myths that continue in our society despite evidence to the contrary. The reality is, I found one survey here, 92% of workers admit to multitasking during virtual meetings. Instead of paying attention, they're off doing something else, different program, doing something completely different. So the question is, why is that? Why is it so hard for us to pay attention during virtual meetings? And this is research out of UCLA. I think this gives us a good clue as to why that is. The fact is, when we lose this physicality, when we're no longer in the same space, we've lost, according to this research, 55% of how we communicate. If you see that, more than half of what we communicate is nonverbal. So when you lose that, these meetings, these remote meetings, are less rich in communication. And guess what? It's harder to pay attention. Good news is there are things you can do to help offset that difficulty, to bring the attention back in, to have effective meetings. And there's three principles that we'll outline here. It's important to keep those meetings tight, make them personal, and make them active. So we'll focus on these three over the next couple minutes. Keeping meetings tight. This is meeting etiquette, and this applies to all meetings, but it applies especially to virtual meetings where that cost of attention is so much higher. Agenda. Always have an agenda. Send it beforehand. If it's an important meeting or big meeting, rehearse ahead of time. During the meeting, you got to start and end on time. We like using the 5-3 rule, right? If it's an hour-long meeting, don't wait more than 5 minutes, regardless of who's in the room, to start the meeting. If it's a 30-minute meeting, don't wait more than 3 minutes. And then take notes, send those notes, follow up afterward. We also want to make meetings as personal as possible. The reality is we're all human, and especially now, we need to connect. So use those 5 minutes, use those 3 minutes at the start of the meeting, talk to people, have a conversation. And then where possible, default to video. Again, it doesn't replace the face-to-face, but it can offset some of that nonverbal communication that's lost. If you're going to use video, really quick, just remember the basics of good video. There's a handy mnemonic device we think of, black. Get the background, the clean and uncluttered, light. Make sure you have enough of it, it's front facing. The angle, make sure your face is in the frame, looking at the camera when possible. And clothing, professional from the waist up. So remember, black for good video. We also need to be active in engaging people in the meeting. Again, right, the cost of attention is higher. The first thing to do is to limit invitees. You want to keep folks in the meeting just the people that have speaking roles, just the people that are involved in that meeting should be the ones on that invite list. And then use visuals always. Even if it's just a blank notebook and you're taking notes on the screen, put that up there. You want to give the people in the meeting more to pay attention to than just these detached voices. So definitely use visuals and then elicit participation. Reach out to people, try and get people involved in the meeting. Other part of that is being a good attendee. There's a couple things you can do as an attendee to stay engaged, accepting that, again, it is more difficult than if you're in person. First one is participate. Let your voice be heard, comment, speak, participate in the meeting. And the other one is always take notes. Recommend with a pen and paper. And here's the thing, even if you write it down and you never look at it again or you throw it away, just the process of taking notes improves your attention to the meeting, and it also improves your retention after the meeting. So again, remember, for good meetings, use that 5-3 rule. If you're using video, remember black. And then use visuals, always, even if it's just notes. All right, so big part of successful meetings is also the technology. We're going to focus here a moment on using the technology and using it well. You want to think about your global settings for your meeting software. You want to think about meeting controls. And this applies, we're using Zoom for this webinar. I'm guessing a lot of folks on this webinar use Zoom daily, but these apply to WebEx, to Teams, to the Google Meets. Keep these in mind. Global settings. First thing is you use that Outlook add-in. We schedule most of our meetings, 90% of our meetings through Outlook. So just make it easier on yourself. Get that Outlook add-in. General settings, a lot of times you want to make it possible to join before the host so people aren't stuck in limbo listening to hold music before the meeting starts. There's a caveat to this dealing with security we'll get to in a little bit. Polling is a great way to keep people engaged in the meeting. Get your default audio settings right. Get those video settings right. So security, if you guys have probably read about this in the news, there's issues of people hijacking meetings, showing inappropriate content called Zoom bombing. You need to be aware of this and certainly need to do what you can to prevent it. Especially if it's a large meeting or if the meeting URL is public, you want to control who can get in. A few options: you can only allow authenticated users. You can create a password to get that extra layer of security. Or in this case, you might want to use the waiting room so you're only letting in people that you want to let in. The other thing is here, you can set it so that if you have to kick somebody out of a meeting, you can set it so they don't come back in. And then also make sure, this is critical, that only the host can share content. You don't want unsolicited content shares throughout the meeting. So in the meeting, there's a few good things to understand. Meeting controls, these are important. You can lock the meeting again to prevent others from joining, and then the mute button. And I know that this is something we all do. I certainly do it myself. Talk at length on mute. It's important to know where the mute is, know how to use it. Make sure you know if you're on mute or if you're not on mute. Then chat. Chat features are a great way. All the different programs out there offer some way to chat. You can communicate with one another without interrupting the meeting. So know and understand these features within the meeting software that you're using. Another big piece is sharing. You need to take responsibility. If you're hosting the meeting, take responsibility for the meeting focus and who's sharing what. It's also important to know what to share. If you're sharing a presentation, share that presentation. Sharing your screen can be dangerous because you're going to see, those interrupting meetings, those inappropriate Skype messages. Inevitably, they're going to pop up when you're sharing your screen. And also control who can share. You don't want people doing it without your permission. Another option is to record meetings. And this is really important if it's a demo or a detailed process discussion, something with a lot of detail you'll want to refer to later. Go ahead and record the meeting. You don't necessarily want to record casual conversations or confidential or sensitive information. Always ask people, let people know that you're recording. In a lot of states, it's the law. Universally, it's a good practice. So again, remember, for meeting controls, get that security right. It's very important, unfortunately, in this day and age. Master the mute button, understand how it works, and get it right. And then know what you're sharing. Prevent those unwanted pop-ups from derailing your meeting. know what you're sharing. All right, so we've talked about meetings. I mean, meetings are in some ways a way to collaborate, but as this webinar says, we really want to focus on moving beyond these online Zoom meetings and talk more about actual collaboration with one another. So we're going to talk about this last section here. We're going to talk about using technology, but we're also going to talk about the power of collaboration, why we do it, what technology can help us do that, and then universally some best practices for collaborating with one another in this strange remote world we now live in. The first thing is collaboration, right? Why do we collaborate? We think about it, collaboration lets us do things together that we couldn't do as individuals. We can merge our brain power, do things together where the sum of what we do is greater than what we could do as individuals. One of my favorite examples in history are these four gentlemen here who were able to create things and do things as a group of four that none of them could do as individuals. So we collaborate to build on ideas, to build on one another, to create something greater than ourselves. We collaborate to share information between us. In today's day and age, there's so much information. We all have our specialized domains of expertise. We need to work across those domains, across those silos. We need to collaborate to share what we know. We need to collaborate to check our assumptions. We assume when we're you know, in business, we make assumptions. We need people that can tell us if that's right, if that's wrong, and build on those assumptions as well. So in the past, before we were forced to work at home, a lot of collaborations physically we did were planned. And some of those, when done right, they were great. It could be very invigorating. I'm thinking of, brainstorming on a whiteboard with markers or sticky notes. Everybody's in the same room creating ideas together. Variation of that would be dot voting, where we're working as a group to come up with the best idea. System diagramming is another thing we used to do, where we would outline technology, outline the architecture on a whiteboard, in a room together. These are things that we planned, that we did previously. Some of the collaboration we did happened naturally. That doesn't mean that it was not valuable. Informal can be very valuable. And some examples of that, we'll think about the pre and post meeting conversations, right? The official meeting's over, but everybody's still in the same room. A lot of times those conversations are some of the most important that you'd have throughout the day. So the pre-meeting and the post-meeting conversations, informal, but at the same time very important. There's a lot of that leaning over the cube, right? We're in the same office, or we're at the coffee maker, or just in the corridor. Those conversations were important. A big part of how we worked together and collaborated. Remember previously we said, right, conversations matter. It's absolutely true, and perhaps it's something we took for granted previously. The other one is happy hours, and not the video Zoom happy hours, but the real happy hours where we'd all get together after work, share ideas, get to know each other. These were important ways that we collaborated, even if they were sort of natural and informal. So we've lost this physicality. We've lost a lot of this ability to collaborate naturally and seamlessly. It's that physical distance, right? It makes it tough. There's new challenges. Let me say here, when we're trying to collaborate now virtually, a lack of visuals really makes this collaboration nearly impossible. Let me show you a quick demonstration here. This is an email. Don't bother to read the email, but it's intimidating. It's a big block of text. It's difficult to digest. It's not effective. This information on the left is giving us this information on the right. This is just a quick whiteboard diagram, and you can see it's just much easier to read. So we need to have those visuals when we collaborate. There's technology out there that can help us. Online collaboration, we say here, it absolutely can work with the right tools. Now, the tools on the left, if we look at Teams, PowerPoint, SharePoint, these are things we used previously and will continue to use when we're collaborating on documents, things like that. The activities on the right, the whiteboard, the visual collaboration, these are things we used to do almost exclusively in person. We need to find these new technologies, use these new technologies to do it remotely. Remember how important visuals are to communicating information. So if you see on the left here, you've got, like Mural, there's a Zoom whiteboard, a lot of different technologies out there. We're not advocating one technology over another. What really matters is that you learn that technology, you understand it, and you use it. So this is an example on the screen you can see here. This is Mural. It's one of the technologies out there, and they all have similar functionality. The thing is, everybody's in the same document. So there's live editing. You can create sticky notes. You can draw if you have the capability, add text, add images. The important thing is people are doing it at the same time in the same space. So it's like a whiteboard where everybody has a marker. And think about cases where this is, you absolutely need this. Think about like Scrum meetings, yes and brainstorming sessions, summit meetings, workshops, strategy sessions, architecture diagramming. Really need that visual component to be successful in those situations. And I'll take it a step further and say that some of these online tools, some of these online whiteboards could even bring some advantages over their physical counterparts. Think about it in person, right? In the room with the markers, um, you oftentimes had somebody standing at the whiteboard holding a marker, writing down what other people said, and that can be detrimental to design thinking sessions or to brainstorming sessions because you've added that extra filter through a scribe. So ideas aren't getting across how they need to. You don't have that issue in virtual settings. It's real time, equal collaboration. People can just write what they're thinking at that moment. Other issue in person, right? Handwriting. Speaking for myself, it's pretty bad. I cannot read it oftentimes after the fact, which means no one else can. You don't have that issue when you're typing the information. And then the question is, well, what do you do with that whiteboard? What do you do with that collaborative, collective idea once the session's done? Used to be these off-angle, overexposed foam captures. A lot of times, if it's not legible, you have to recreate it in Visio and send it out to folks. Not an issue with the virtual programs. You just save them, export it as is. There was space was an issue previously in person. You're confined to whatever whiteboard happened to be in that conference room. Virtually, essentially limitless space. And here's a big one here. In person, the dry markers, I can't tell you how much time I've spent walking from conference room to conference room trying to find a marker with some life left in it. No marker malfunctions virtually. A little different technology. And then lastly, in person, you don't have any history of the changes. There's no change log. For a lot of these programs, there is that functionality. So again, we really recommend you go out, seek the technology, learn the technology, and use it for those instances where you had those formal whiteboarding, visual collaboration settings. Now, the other one we talked about, right, there's these informal conversations. You see some collisions that used to just happen naturally. These are no longer possible when we're not in the same space physically. So we need to be deliberate, intentional about replacing those informal conversations. Again, right? Conversations matter. A few ways you can do that. One of them is the Zoom and work. It's just an open channel. Turn your video off, keep a Zoom in the background if you're working with another person on a project. That way you can have sort of incidental side-to-side conversations. It simulates sort of working side by side. Use those chats, right? The Slack or the Skype, use those chats to have those conversations with one another. And then the pre and post meeting conversation is not going to happen naturally. So you need to set up time before meeting or time after meeting to do that debrief. Because again, a lot of important information, a lot of important decisions happen in those instances. So we need to deliberately replace what we've lost. The other piece of it, we talked about in collaboration or informal collaboration were those happy hours. So how do we make these connections? How do we make these personal connections in a world where we cannot be, for the time being, in the same physical space? I'm sure a lot of folks on this webinar have participated in virtual happy hours in the past. Not a replacement for the real thing, but it can be a very effective way to let off a little steam, have some fun with one another, get to know each other. We recommend coffee breaks and, of course, virtual coffee breaks. And that just means putting 15 minutes on someone's calendar, someone who you don't necessarily talk to on a regular basis, but who you would have had conversations with in the office around the coffee machine previously. Put 15 minutes on their calendar. Have that conversation over the phone. Uh, Polls are a fun way, fun distraction during meetings or other events, just to get people engaged and again, have a little fun. So let's talk about best practices. And these are universal best practices. Again, this is technology agnostic. Doesn't really matter what technology you're using. What matters is, that you follow these best practices. So practice, right? Practice makes perfect. Whatever technology you're using, learn it ahead of time, understand how to use it. At the beginning of the meeting, if it's the first time folks on the call have used this technology, go ahead and take 5 or 10 minutes to train people, show people how it works, get people comfortable with this collaboration technology. And then finding the right team size is important. If you have too many people, it's just not possible to collaborate effectively. I've heard the number out there, I think 8 is the maximum team size. Uh, it's somewhere around there. Definitely not more than 10. 5 to 8 seems pretty ideal. So have the right team size. If it's a really big group, you can split the group up into different breakout sessions. I know Zoom and a lot of other technologies allow for those virtual breakout rooms. So take advantage of that feature. You need to time box any of these collaborations as well. Establish that ahead of time and stick to it. And then here's one too, Zoom fatigue, and I don't need to call out Zoom. It's really virtual meeting fatigue. And this is real. I'm sure folks on the call here, folks on the webinar can relate, right? Zoom, being on these virtual meetings hours at a time is frankly exhausting. Um, if your schedule before was back to back to back meetings, you need to adjust that in this new virtual world, right? A 4-hour workshop in person can be fun, invigorating, um, and work well. A 4-hour Zoom meeting would be terrible. So we need to keep this in mind. You need to adjust your schedule for this new virtual world. Think about meeting length too. If you have 4 hours of content, you're going to want to break it up over 4 or 5 different sessions if it's necessary to convey those 4 hours. And lastly, and this is very, very important, and I would just emphasize this for all meetings. Anytime you're getting a lot of people together, ask yourself, is this meeting necessary? A lot of times the answer is going to be no. A lot of times it's better served email or through an online collaboration. A lot of times, right, the meeting is not the way to go. So ask yourself every time, is this necessary? So again, some things to remember for collaboration virtually. First of all, use those visual tools for collaboration. Remember the power of visuals versus email versus text. Use those live visuals, use those tools for collaboration. The other one is to intentionally replace those informal collaborations, those conversations, those chats that were so much a part of our lives beforehand. We need to replace those and be deliberate, be intentional about doing so. And lastly, beware of fatigue. Not all meetings matter. I would just emphasize that again. Not all meetings need to be on people's calendars. So I know we've given a lot of information to you over the past 30 minutes, and everyone, I thank you so much for taking time out of your day to do so. Let me end with just 4 things here. If you only get 4 things, I hope you get more, but if you only get 4 things out of this webinar, these would be the 4. Remember first, routines save brain power. You don't have to think about what's next. When you have a routine, you can focus on the matter at hand. Second, in meetings, use visuals. Just give people something more to hold on to than that detached voice. So always use visuals. Get the security right. You don't want to be the victim of Zoom bombing. Get it right ahead of time. And then lastly, and I'll say it again, question every meeting. A much better use of time than just a traditional meeting is often collaboration, or it can just be an email or a phone conversation, something other than the formal Zoom meeting. So lastly, I'll close it up. This is a quote from Doug Powell from IBM, and I really like it. I think it applies in this case. Right? Changing team behavior is not something that happens instantly. It's not going to happen in a single meeting. Give it some time. We're all learning and adapting to this new way. So follow these principles. You're going to have success, but give it some time to take hold. So again, thank you so much. My name is Brian. You heard from Ian, Blake, and Douglas helped with this presentation as well. Thank you very much to everyone. And here's what we look like when we get our hair cut. So thanks very much, all.
Thanks, Brian. So we're going to shift to the Q&A session. We do have one question that we'd like to answer live. So we had a question around how do we create a safe environment to invite creative conflict using virtual collaboration? Certainly harder when we're not in person, but a few thoughts that we wanted to share in tips. Number one, make sure that early in the meeting you set the ground rules to encourage respect and participation. Make it really clear that a key objective is for everybody to be heard and for the meeting to have that really open collaboration. Second, we'd encourage utilizing improv techniques and approaches such as yes and to encourage idea building. Next tip would be leverage anonymous collaboration features that are built into tools like Pop-in or Mural so that we remove identity from that and folks can just contribute their ideas. Another tip would be make sure that you're smart about being mindful of the number of people in the meeting. To Brian's earlier point, smaller groups tend to be a little bit easier to both facilitate and to encourage collaboration. And then lastly, a lot of the web conferencing tools include features to raise hand. We'd encourage that you include that as part of your meeting opening and encourage folks to raise their hands so that you can address those people individually and make sure that you can call on them. So those are some tips for our question into the QA. We thank you for joining today's webinar. Appreciate the time, and we hope that you all learned something today. If you have any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out to us using those contact email addresses that you see on the slide here. We'll also be sending out the video. So thanks again. Bye-bye.